Hi everyone. Week 7, end of week 7, beginning of week 8. Uh, Distributed cognition, and a big thank you to Jocelyn for moderating this week. Um, let's see. Well, actually, distributed learning and distributed cognition, and this whole idea of distribution, is something a concept that people find quite disconcerting. But you folks seems to have kind of gone in there and been grappling away, and that's good to see. You're I think, quite a sophisticated group, and there's lots of interesting ideas that emerged during the discussion this week. Sorry for I'm kind of prone today. I have discovered after going to the doctor that the reason I'm feeling like this and have all these peculiar symptoms is that I have shingles, which I didn't know nothing about. And if you've never had it, don't get it, and you can be inoculated against it, so I advise you to do that. Apparently you only get it once, thank heavens. So anyway, so I'm kind of recuperating from that and a cold, which is why they think I've got shingles to begin with. So in the conversation, I think the notion of technology integration, most people feel that we should have kind of got further than we have, but it was also clear that people do have a quite good understanding of the complexity of change, of educational change, and why that's particularly the case with adopting and shifting and integrating new technologies. And I was going to, because this came up sort of later in the conversation here, I was going to mention, what's happening with pre-service teacher education at OISE in particular, but because of all the changes that the government's putting through. And basically, they've kind of doubled the amount of time that the practicum is going to take. And they've added some particular requirements like Aboriginal education and some some exposure to issues of mental health. And I mean, these were things that were actually in our programs already. But for instance, when I taught the psychological foundations of learning and development, which I used to teach in pre-service, I would do a whole section on kind of common mental health considerations. But I think that, I'm glad in a way that they want to make more of an emphasis of this, because I think it's really an important thing and something that's growing too. But, so they double the practicum time and require these elements, but the technology expectations were actually already in our MT program and in many of the pre-service cohorts that we already had there. But and in fact, the new requirements look very much like our existing Masters of Teaching program in CTL, where you get teaching certification, you get your B.Ed, but also you get an MT, a Masters of Teaching. And but they've reduced by a third the number of spaces, and also, well, actually, and taken a big swath of the funding away per student. So we are stuck really now trying to make this work. And they want to reduce the overall number of places because we're overproducing teachers. But there's also unforeseen consequences, which I don't think the ministry's really looked at, and that is that a 2-year program is going to be quite unmanageable for many professionals, people who want to come in and have a second career, for example. So I really worry about that, because it's a very different demographic who would come and do a 9-month B.Ed versus a 2-year MT, for example, or even a 2-year B.Ed. So anyway, so there's we're really undergoing a lot of change at the moment, and I think all institutions who are offering pre-service teacher education are going through a lot of kind of revamping. We have a number of groups set up to, both at the OISE level and within CTL, to re-envision our MT and see what cool things we can bring in there. And it's offering us actually a very exciting opportunity for faculty who are tenure stream, research streamed, to be more involved in the Master of Teaching program. So there's a lot of excitement actually here about that at the moment, which is nice, and hopefully that will continue. But so we're going to go on with our planning. We won't know until March the full impact of what the ministry wants in terms of the quota for this coming year of B.Ed students. So until we know that, it's very hard to plan. So all these deadlines are terribly tight. It makes it very, very hard to do, really deep and meaningful planning when you've got kind of no advance notice. So it's a bit of a challenge here. But in the MT program to date, for instance, we've got an online community that uses a specially designed Pepper environment for the cross-program communication, and also all of the work for each course and everything else is all in one kind of place, or accessible through one kind of environment, although each community has its own little view into that space. And we've had a dedicated course that looks at technologies in the classroom now for a year or so, and we have a lot of online supports for the MT research project that goes on in that program, in addition to individual instructor use of technology in courses. So all of this, I think, it will only increase over time. So that's just a bit of background, not entirely to do with distributed learning, but it was a sort of interesting thing, and many of you are teachers, and so it's kind of relevant to your worlds. Technological artifacts. There was an interesting sort of post-literacy discussion in this second question. Audrey had added some links to about an interesting thought experiment to look at a time where there could be basically as dramatic a switch from oral as that one from oral to written literacy that happened, produced, that would have the same kind of effect on world culture, but obviously a completely different kind of change. And it's such a big change, we can't really imagine what it is yet because it hasn't happened. And I think that's true of really big changes. They're very hard to figure out ahead of time. But it's interesting to think about, I think, because thought and language are such very embodied processes for us, and they're also very, very linked to the mediums that we use. So the linearity of a written book, for instance, affects us in what's considered good rational thought, which is linear and very clear and linked in particular kinds of ways. And it affects our thought processes too. So the popular artifacts that we kind of do literacy with, like stories, oral stories, or written and textual productions, pictures, art, sculpture, and the increasingly different kinds of visual representations that technology is making available to us, new mashups of varying kinds of things, and new ways to sort of think about what's creative and what are different ways to represent things. That's only going to increase, I think, and change with time. So it's very exciting. I also like that because I think it's helpful to look back and see what distributed cognition looked like before the printing press, and it's clearly a something that is. It just happens in such a different way. So oral traditions, and then suddenly you have books and you have more access than you ever had before. And now with internet technology, we have faster access and more equitable, in a sense at least, more possibility of access, shall I say, to more people. We will still, however, think and hopefully speak, and those processes will be continued to be very interrelated in very profound ways, in the way that I was talking about with Vygotsky's work in the sort of the power of thought and language as reciprocal, integrated, and constantly evolving processes. So it's all kind of rather exciting stuff. In the third question, there was a bit of a discussion too about contributing to online versus face-to-face discussion, and I mentioned the issues of power and how they find themselves their way into classrooms, regardless of modality, really. Authentic discussion is a hard thing for any educational context at any age of student, really, because there's always an issue of grades or judgment involved, and but I'm not convinced that it's really that different between face-to-face and online. It's just, it looks different, But the environment differs, and it offers like different participatory structures, for example, for people to work with. Each context, though, requires the learning of social rules, right, in the classroom or online, um, and what is or isn't appropriate, how long a conversational turn is, for instance, if you're in a classroom, or who speaks when. You have the flexibility of having multiple threads online at one time, so in principle, you should be able to engage with something meaningful whenever you're online, because you don't have to to restrict what you're dealing with to whatever particular conversation is continuing at that moment. You can have multiple threads going at once. And that permanent trace aspect, that thing that people get very put off by when they first start working online, which is that if I write this down, it's never going to go away. It also preserves the important trace of the distributed wisdom and contributions that different people bring, which I think is a very valuable thing. But but I think that those issues of power and are always present, and so I think it's hard to say that conversation is entirely authentic. But I don't think it's any more authentic in classrooms, because as long as we're evaluating people. And as long as we have these roles of instructor and student, and as long as one of those people is given out marks, then we're going to have those things. I don't think it means we can't have good conversations, but I think we're foolish to not recognize that sort of is there. Now we're going to start week 8, moderated by Audrey, and that's going to be distributed cognition 2. And this is going to be a bit more of a focus on its potential impact on learning and educational contexts. So we'll see what that's going to bring to us this week. And just the American Educational Research Association and the Canadian Society for the Study of Education are the two big conferences that many people in educational research go to each year. And the Pepper Group has come, we're doing a couple of things. We've got a bunch of papers for ARA, and they've got accepted, and that's in March. And in May, we have the Canadian Society for Study of Education, and that's, and in fact, we have a panel about assessment from the Pepper Group. And so I was thinking that I might upload those papers, and I'm thinking I'll put it in our resourcey thing. Where should I put that? Useful reading and references. I'm going to pop them in there, because I thought they might be helpful for you folks when they may just tweak things when you're thinking about your final papers. So I thought that might be useful. Okay. All right, well, I think you can hear other people coughing in the house. My eldest son is sick in the other room. The only person who seems to be perfectly fine is the dog, who's busy chewing something in another room. Okay, well, I will talk to you more online as the week continues. Even if I'm doing it from bed, I will be with you. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you more online soon.